Welcome to Talking Heads on USA Global TV, starring the one and only wonderful Dr. JACALYN. It's a prestigious place where world-class influencers and experts meet, and where you'll find the most trusted advisors and coaches for all things in life and business. Visit usaglobaltv.com to sign up for our newsletter, get the value you need, and be first in line to learn about events and giveaways and other valuable content. Connect with us. Email Dr. JACALYN at usaglobaltv.com to talk about how you can become part of USA Global TV. That's USA Global TV, where the doctor is always in.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to USA Global TV, and hello to our friends listening on Business Talk Radio. I am Dr. JACALYN KERBECK, and our show today is Loving Longevity, and we're going to be talking about something that is so important to all of us. How do we reverse chronic disease? And to discuss this with me today, we have an amazing guest, but let's first bring out our dynamic and wonderful co-host, Annie Bush. Hi, Annie.
Hi there. Hello, everybody. And hello to everybody on Business Talk Radio.
So good to have you here today, as always, on our show. And you look just glowing yourself. What is your secret?
I'm a longevity strategist. So I have access to all the newest information that's out there as far as keeping ourselves healthier now so that we stay healthier longer. And that's what Loving Longevity is all about.
Well, Annie, we've had some wonderful shows already, and This week is going to be another fantastic show. I'm going to introduce our guests, but before I do, I want to spotlight you and have you share with our audience. People are always joining us from around the world for the first time. Share with our audience a little bit about your background and why you're so passionate about longevity.
Well, my background is I've been a personal trainer for about a decade, and that morphed into being a health coach, which then morphed into being a brain health coach, because I realized a few years ago that without your brain, without your memory, without your personality, without your identity, there's just going to be years of suffering. And so this whole subject of longevity has become a passion of mine. And one of the things that I want to do on the program is keep you all informed of the newest information that's out there. And since our last program, Tony Robbins has released his new book. It's called Life Force. For you folks on the radio, I'm showing the book on TV. And what it includes is some of the newest breakthroughs to increase our health span, which is the number of years that we live healthy, not just our longevity, how our lifespan, but how many years we're actually going to be healthy. One of the things that Tony talks about is his experience with getting stem cell injections in Panama. He talks about how expensive it was, but how well they worked. And it's all in the one chapter in his book. At the very end of that chapter, then, he talks about it's not a one-time deal. It's you have to go back. It was for his shoulder, you have to go back for multiple injections. And what he said was the secret sauce, his words, not mine, was the small number of residual stem cells that help to activate his existing stem cells, which then, that secret sauce, restored the old cells to a younger, higher functioning state. Just like that science modality, that thinking mimics what we're doing with the X39 stem cell patches. It is a constant stimulation of your existing stem cells. So when I read this in the book, I was pretty excited that the science that Tony Robbins is relying on is validating the science that we're getting on our end from X39. And the other thing that Tony talks about in his book is Alzheimer's and cognitive decline. And that's what we're going to be talking about today.
How exciting. Wonderful. And thank you for sharing that about Tony Robbins' book. And of course, I'm not a paid spokesperson, but I'm always interested to hear what Tony's doing. It's fascinating. So, Annie, when we look at longevity, we have to take care of ourselves. I think we have to have some good genetics somewhere. And we also have to realize that if our bodies are not performing at the highest level, what can we possibly do to change that? And, you know, I've shared with you, I have 3 chronic illnesses, ulcerative colitis, eczema, hello, eczema flare, and psoriasis. So I'm very interested to bring out our guest, and I know you know our guest well. Our guest today is Dr. Garland Glenn. He is the founder, owner, and clinical director of the Carroll Institute. He is a speaker and an expert at reversing chronic disease. Let's welcome him to the program. Hi there, Dr. Glenn. Nice to see you.
Yes, thank you. Nice to see you guys too.
Yes, and Dr. Glenn will be able to help you with all three of your conditions, by the way.
Yay!
Actually, yes. So the things that you mentioned just so happen to be autoimmune diseases. And based on some literature, some research done at Harvard back around 2010, published by Alessio Fasano, we now know how to, you can't cure an autoimmune disease, but you can put it into remission. So that's not exactly what we were going to talk about today, but that's all a part of it. And I'll tie something else to this as well. You mentioning Tony Robbins, the detox protocol that we use on our patients for heavy metals like mercury, lead, and things like that were developed by a colleague of mine, Dr. Shade, out in Colorado, using Tony Robbins as our patient. So there you go.
Wow.
So all of this stuff hooks together.
It's fascinating.
Right.
So,
and we're going to talk about all the new technologies that you use there at the Institute to assess and identify and treat. And yes, Dr. Shade's push catch detox system is amazing.
Yeah, it's very good, especially for heavy metals.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. All right. To get started, I'll tell you what, let's just dive right in. Is it possible to reverse cognitive decline and Alzheimer's? And if so, how?
Well, first of all, the answer is absolutely. The second answer is it becomes a little bit, it's, how would you say, it's complex. It's not a simple problem. Now, what a lot of people don't realize is that what we call modern medicine is based on a 20th century model. And that model is that there's one treatment for each problem. When it comes to cognitive decline, that is not the case. And cognitive decline, or dementia, is an umbrella term under which all forms of cognitive decline exist. The largest being Alzheimer's. That's the one people hear about the most, but the others are vascular dementia, Lewy body dementia. That's when you have the crazy hallucinations. Parkinson's is under that umbrella. What we know now, based on research done by my mentor, the person who trained me out at UCLA, Dr. Bredesen, is that so far to date, we have identified 36 different things that cause cognitive decline. Most people, because you live, will develop problems with at least several of those, if not more. By the time somebody develops something called mild cognitive impairment. So what's that? Well, mild cognitive impairment is when people who know you well can tell that you're slipping, but somebody who doesn't know you couldn't tell that you're slipping. By the time you reach that mild cognitive impairment stage, the average person will have at least 10 different things going on that are affecting their brains. And those things can be anything from blood sugar regulation problems. So right now, 40% of Americans are diabetic. That's a huge problem. It can be heavy metal exposure like mercury, Tony Robbins, other metal toxicities like lead and things like that. They can be biotoxins, things like funguses and viruses and molds, hormonal problems. In other words, there's an entire cascade of things that when they get together, they start to cause the brain to degenerate, or they start to cause it to decline. And the way that you address cognitive decline is by first identifying which things a particular person has going on. So you might have lived in a moldy house, or you might have played professional football like my uncle did for the Baltimore Colts when the Colts were in Baltimore. My uncle played pro ball. He was a center. What did he do? He spent all day, every day smacking his head against somebody. So you can have repetitive trauma. When you identify what the root causes are, then you can develop a protocol for addressing each one individually, and we prioritize them, and we go through one at a time, and we fix these things. And in the process of doing that, the brain, back to your stem cells that you mentioned just a few moments ago, the brain actually has stem cells inside of it. And we didn't know this until just a few years ago, that you actually have stem cells in your brain. And if you know how to stimulate them, they will differentiate into the type of cells that can replace the parts of your brain that are shrinking. So if we identify what's going on, the root causes, or what we call it now, there's a whole new movement in healthcare now being called functional medicine. Functional medicine is not about treating the symptoms of the problem, which is what traditional medicine is based on. It's about trying to identify what is the root cause. And if you can identify the cause and fix that, then the symptoms resolve themselves. So when you identify the root cause for the cognitive decline, you go through and fix these things, whether it's getting rid of mercury, whether it's reversing diabetes, calming down autoimmune disease. We mentioned that just a few moments ago. You can actually get an autoimmune disease that attacks parts of your brain. It's called cerebellar ataxia. And when you reverse these things, then what happens is the brain rejuvenates, it rebuilds. We actually have MRIs that show rebuilding, regrowing brain tissue. We can actually measure it with a new type of MRI called a volumetric MRI. When you do that, you will see people's cognitive function return. And we see it in our office. We see it every day. This is what we do. This is the only thing that we do in our office is reverse cognitive decline. So yes, can you reverse it? Absolutely. If you know how to do it. That's what we do.
Woo, fascinating.
I got going there for a minute. I love to talk about what I talk about.
That's right. The show's about you. That's why we have you here. So don't worry about it.
All right. Y'all look better than I do, though. No, I'm just kidding.
Funny spot.
I have a question. So I'm really excited based on, I shared that I have autoimmune diseases. So is this an opportunity for everyone, or are there certain criteria that a person has to meet in order to be a candidate to have this reversal?
You have to be above ground and still breathing.
Okay, yay.
That's our criteria. No, on a more serious note, by the time a person gets to where they can no longer perform their activities of daily living, that means they can no longer get themselves up, get dressed, do their, their bathroom stuff, and so forth. By the time you get there, you have a lot of different brain functions that have been shutting down. So that's the line that's where we draw the line. If you're going to put it in stages, that would be about stage 6 Alzheimer's. If you put it in a stage like that, if you can catch it before that, then there's a lot that you can do.
That's exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about how early can you detect it, though?
Yeah. Okay. So what we know is this. Brain function. This is an analogy that I use. What happens in your brain is you have a lot of backup systems. So as opposed to, let's say, your heart, you have no backup. If your heart fails, you fail. It's just bam, it's dramatic, and it can be over in a moment. Your heart has no backup. Your brain has multiple backup systems. So let's say I'm here in Sarasota, Florida. This is where I grew up. And let's say I was going to take a flight to Chicago. Maybe I wanted to go watch a Cubs game at Wrigley Field. So if I were on the plane flying up there, I'm sitting back, in the cabin. If the navigation system for the plane went out, whoever's running navigation up in the cockpit just switches over to the backup. Sitting back in, economy, I'd have no idea anything was wrong. And if that system went out, they'd switch over to the next backup. You wouldn't notice that there was a problem until you looked out the window and you could see the interstate and you could count the cars on the interstate, because at some point, somebody has to pull out the charts and go back to doing it the old way. When it comes to brain shrinkage, these things can be progressing for anywhere to up to 20 or more years before you actually begin noticing symptoms. So what are the first symptoms you notice? You reach for a word and it's not there. So you do some kind of a dramatic pause, you clear your throat, you come up with another word, and off you go, and nobody's the wiser. You open the refrigerator door, and for just a moment, you can't remember what, oh yeah, that's right, I was wanting, I wanted the ketchup or whatever it happened to be. This progression can take anywhere from 20 or more years in some people. But we now have access to a very, very new type of MRI called a volumetric MRI. This is not your standard brain MRI. But with a volumetric MRI, we can detect shrinkage in the brain up to 20 years before you have that first senior moment. And we are actually hoping, Dr. Bredesen in particular is pushing really hard. We would like to see a volumetric be a part of everyone's workup at, let's say, 55 or 60 years old. They say when you're 60, everybody should have a colonoscopy. I'd rather have a brain MRI. I'm much more concerned about how my brain is functioning. So that's with brain MRIs, we can pick up brain shrinkage up to 20 years before you get the first symptom or senior moment.
It's great news.
Yeah, it is.
And it's really good news for, and we're going to talk about DNA and genetics here in a minute, of children who their parents are suffering cognitive decline, and they're younger, let's say 30s, 40s, 50s, and they want to do preventative care. Right. So that they don't decline. Talk to us a little bit about the patients that you're seeing that are purely want to do this for preventative reasons.
All right. So genetically, we have a whole new type of genetic. This is not 23andMe. As fun as it is, 23andMe is great because, do I wear lederhosen or a kilt to the family reunion? But we have a whole new type of genetic testing. This whole thing was put together by a colleague of mine. Her name is Dr. Sharon Hausman-Cohen. She did all of her work up at Harvard. So this is really top shelf stuff. We are now able to look at DNA, and we can look at about 1,000 different genes that have an impact on cognitive function, not just the ones that people always think about, something called the APOE gene. The APOE gene is sort of the genetic predisposition to developing Alzheimer's. So we all have 2 APOE genes, and there are 3 types. There is E2, E3, and E4. So you've got 2 of those, and it just depended on what mom and dad had. And APOE2 and APOE3 have nothing to do with Alzheimer's. APOE4 does. The way it works is like this. Genetics are a probability. They are not an inevitability. So let's say if you don't have any APOE gene at all, the probability of you developing Alzheimer's is somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 to 10, maybe 12%. If you have 1 copy of the gene, your probability goes up to around 30, 35%. If you have 2 copies, your probability goes up to well over 50%. Some people are saying in the 70 to 80% range. It has to do with a vulnerability. So I use this analogy. I like analogies. If you get out on the interstate and you are driving 110 miles an hour, the probability that you will have an accident goes way up. Doesn't mean you will. And if you get out on the interstate and you're driving 70, 75, the probability of you having an accident goes down, but it doesn't mean you won't. Genetics are probabilities. When we look at the genetics for a person, we can then see how to tweak or to fine tune treatment for that particular person. And I'll give you an example. We have a particular fellow who's a patient in our office, nice guy. He's out playing like 2-3 hours of tennis in Florida every day. This guy's got the killer tan, he's trim, he's buff, he's the nicest fellow. We run his labs and his vitamin D comes back in the basement. You think, how can it be in the basement? The guy's spending 2 or 3 hours every day in the Florida sun. He ought to have tons of vitamin C. Well, we run his DNA. He has what's called a SNP. And a SNP is a variation on a gene. So it's like you can buy a car, it's either a 2-door or a 4-door. Same car, or a Mustang, you can get a convertible or a fastback. It's both, they're all Mustangs, but they're different. So he's got this differentiation of his vitamin D controlling gene in which he cannot turn sunlight into vitamin D. So now we know how to fine tune our protocol to treat him as an individual. This is where medicine has to go. What we call modern medicine is really 20th century medicine. If you have a bacteria, you get an antibiotic. You all get the same antibiotic unless you're allergic to it or something. In other words, the treatment is based on the disease and not tuned to the patient. When you get into chronic long-term diseases like cancer, heart disease, dementia, you have to fine-tune the treatment to that person because these are extremely complex problems. 20th century diseases were simple diseases. 21st century diseases are very complex. Our healthcare delivery system is not designed to be individualized. It's designed to be mass delivered. How long is the average doctor's visit? In America, in the United States, the average doctor visit in the United States right now is 8 minutes. Why? Doctors get paid in 15-minute increments, and I only have to see you for 8 minutes to get paid for 15. How much deep root, looking for root causes and fine-tuning can you do in 8 minutes? Like none. So you get this drug. Let's try this for 4 weeks. And if it works, great. And if it doesn't, well, then we'll try a different one or we'll change your dosage. And if you do that a few times and it doesn't get better, then what do? You go to a specialist and they start the same process all over again. Our healthcare delivery system is not designed to match the complex problems that we have. So this is where we are. I kind of went off on a little tangent. I like tangents.
I have to say that was so enlightening.
A lot of people don't realize. Why do you go to the doctor and he spends 8 minutes with you? Because if he spends 20 minutes with you, he won't get paid. And they're running a business. And I'm not playing the violin for the doctors, but the fact is, if you can't turn over patients, you don't get paid and you don't stay in business.
Makes sense. I just went to the doctor this week about my eczema situation, and the doctor said, okay, what do you think's wrong with you? Okay, what do you think you need for it? Okay, thanks. Give it to her. I'll be back. And never came back. I was like, okay, nice. 5 minutes. But anyway, it worked out. We have a question from one of our team members, Diane Floyd-Bain. I think you mean, when patients go in for their yearly physical, can we ask our internal medicine doctor to, ask for your patients to receive a volumetric MRI?
All right, here is the dilemma. And let me preface this by saying that 95% of all the litigation on the planet is filed in the United States of America. Okay, I hear somebody laughing.
That's me.
All right, now, this is the way this works. If the doctor runs a test, he becomes ethically responsible, i.e. liable, for whatever those results show. If the doctor doesn't know what to do with that test, if he doesn't know how to read it, and he doesn't know what to do with it, he's not going to want to run it because he's liable for it. That's the first thing. The second thing along with that is not every imaging center has the software to run that MRI. There are two companies that provide software for this. There's NeuroQuant, and that's what I use in my office, and there's NeuroReader. And they're equally good. I like NeuroQuant because I think the report is easier for my patients to understand. That's why I use NeuroQuant. But your typical average imaging MRI, CT scan clinic is probably not going to have that software. So your internist may not have ever even heard of it because it's pretty new stuff. This is a little factoid that most people are completely unaware of. In the current, I mean, as in the right now medical world, the clinical practice is 17 years behind published research. So what your doctor is practicing today is anywhere from 15 to 20 years behind the literature. So your doctor's probably never even heard of a volumetric MRI. I'm sorry, I'm waiting on your parade.
Right.
We've got another comment.
Okay.
Andre Holland, bespoke healthcare to customize your treatment with the
Absolutely.
That's right. And the other thing I'm going to offer is you can call our office, and I believe the number's up there, and we can have a conversation depending on what stage you are in. If you're in totally preventative mode and there's an imaging center near you, we may be able to arrange for you to go to that imaging center, have the volumetric MRI done, have it sent to Dr. Glenn, and he can do the analysis.
Yeah, we can do that.
We can do that.
We can find the place. We can find the closest one to you and have you go there and get it run. And since you mentioned that, in case we don't come back to it or somebody has to get off the show, what we offer in our office, in our clinic, is we offer something called a free discovery phone call. In other words, it gives you a chance to call in, talk to somebody who knows what they're talking about. In this case, one of our coaches. Annie happens to be one of our coaches. But you can talk to somebody who knows about this and understands this. Tell them your story. Ask some questions. We are able to then sort of give you some well-informed next step advice. Should you come see us? Maybe. Should you see somebody else? Maybe, but that's what we need to, we offer that in our office. It's called a free discovery phone call. You get on the phone with one of our health coaches for about 15, 20, 25 minutes. You get to tell your story, ask some questions, and get some, and then we can kind of point you in the right direction.
And for people who are listening on Business Talk Radio, just get your pen ready, pencil ready. The number is 941-350-7722.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And if we could put that in the comments on the YouTube, and then so they'll have that in writing too, that would be awesome. All right, Dr. Glenn, I'm going to open the can of worms. Tony Robbins has the chapter of Alzheimer's, and there is one page dedicated to the lifestyle changes that could prevent Alzheimer's. And the rest of the chapter is talking about things like single modality drugs and a vaccine that gets rid of the amyloid plaque.
Sure. Okay. That's a can of worms.
I know.
But here's the way it works. Modern healthcare is based on what we call a monotherapeutic model. This model goes back to 1942. I mean, it's an actual particular date and patient. So a woman went into Yale Hospital with septicemia, that's an infection in the blood, in 1942 following a miscarriage. At that time, infectious disease was the #1 cause of death on the planet. She went into the hospital fully expecting to die. She was given penicillin She was the first patient to ever be given penicillin for an infection, and she did not die. That is where this entire idea that you treat disease with a drug comes from. Now, when you do autopsies on people who die from Alzheimer's type of dementia, they often have something called amyloid plaques. So pharmaceutical companies for the last 50 years have been desperately searching for something to get rid of the amyloid plaques, thinking that the plaque caused the problem. What we now know, and this has been in the literature, but remember, clinical practice is 17 years behind the literature. This has been in the literature now for a number of years. Amyloid plaques actually have antiviral and antimicrobial properties, indicating that the brain is in some way trying to protect itself from something. It may be trying to protect itself from a virus. It could be trying to protect itself from some sort of a mycotoxin like mold or a fungus. These things can get into your brain. They can get into your brain by breathing them in. They can get into your brain through your bloodstream if they leak through your gut and into your blood. And by the way, leaky gut has been demonstrated to be one of the three legs of the three-legged stool that is required to have an autoimmune disease. So what happens is when the brain is under attack, it tries to defend itself by creating amyloid plaques. Think of amyloid plaques like little castles. You build a castle to protect yourself from being attacked. If you take a drug that can get rid of the plaques, like the drug that came out last summer from Biogen, the FDA provisionally approved that drug. If you've heard of it, it's the one that's $56,000 a year. All right. It causes brain swelling and bleeding, and it makes people die. And they have until 2029 to prove that it actually works. And it was compared against our protocol, and we did much better. But companies can't make any money off of our protocol. But what this drug does is it gets rid of the plaques. But if you don't get rid of what's causing the brain to make the plaques, the brain continues to be attacked, it continues to shrink, and you continue to have cognitive decline. So getting rid of the plaques is a red herring, so to speak. It can be done. There are drugs that get rid of plaques, but getting rid of the plaques does not improve cognition because the plaquing is not the problem. It's the protective response of the brain to being attacked by one or more of those 36 things that I mentioned earlier.
Wow.
So until you stop the inflammation that's causing the shrinkage, you can remove plaque all day long, but the inflammation is still going to keep coming.
It's like if you keep pulling the tack out of your bicycle tube or the glass, but you keep riding through glass, you keep getting a flat. The solution to a leaky bicycle tube is not a patch, it's to clean up where you ride.
All right, so talking about cleaning it up where you ride, you mentioned our protocol.
Yes.
And the lifestyle changes. Can you give the listeners an idea of what's involved with that?
The lifestyle changes, all right. When we look at lifestyle changes, the biggest thing is what we eat. And doctors that are honest will tell you that most doctors, they don't know zip about nutrition. The average doctor in the United States gets 18 and a half hours of nutritional training. Only 21 medical schools in the United States as of today even have a required course in nutrition. So doctors are really the last people on the planet you should ask about nutrition. You should probably ask your grandma, all right? But the way doctors are trained, and back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, is eat what you want, your body will take what it needs, it'll get rid of the rest. Well, that kind of worked okay until we started doing two really big things with our food supply. We started to genetically modify our food. Now, food isn't the same thing. When you eat wheat, let's say that's a big one right now, this whole gluten wheat thing. When we were kids growing up, wheat fields were 5 and 6 feet tall. They were amber waves of grain flowing across America's heartland with purple mountains in the background or whatever, right? Wheat fields now are 18 to 24 inches tall. What we grow now as wheat isn't anything like what we grew 50 years ago as wheat. Wheat was hybridized by a fellow named Norman Borland at Texas A&M in 1968. It is a different plant, but when you grind it up and make Wonder Bread out of it, it tastes like bread. Well, what they started doing in the mid-90s, not only were they changing the food, is they started to spray our food with pesticides in 1994. As industrialized farming took over from smaller farming, one of the things they did is they wanted to be able to spray crops to get rid of bugs and weeds and all this stuff. So they did. And the active ingredient in the name brand, which is out there, is called glyphosate. And glyphosate does a lot of bad things. So don't read the news on this, okay? As a matter of fact, I was listening to an interview yesterday with Dr. Stephanie Seven, who did bachelor's, master's, PhD, all at MIT. This woman is the world's leading expert on glyphosate. This stuff does some really nasty stuff. But when you start genetically modifying your food and then you're spraying it with pesticides, glyphosate, and so forth, before you harvested it, nobody's standing out there in the wheat fields washing this stuff off before they grind it up and turn it into a bagel. So what you do now, when you eat wheat products, let's say, grown in America, North America, you're eating Roundup. It just is. This stuff does a number on your gut. It destroys your intestinal lining. It generates an inflammatory response. It produces something called leaky gut, which is a scientific fact. So even if you don't think it exists, it does. When you have a leaky gut, you get undigested bits of protein into the blood that shouldn't be there, and you develop an immune response to them. Now, you can develop immune responses to your brain, or you can develop immune responses to connective tissue or skin, and you can end up with eczema, psoriasis, all these types of things. All of these things have, if you know what I mean by go hockey stick, if you look, that's the whole thing, things going along just kind of at a steady state for many, many, many years, and then all of a sudden they go way up, they go hockey stick. This whole autoimmune thing went hockey stick in the mid-90s, and because we started spraying our food with pesticides in 1994. This is very well documented in the literature.
Unbelievable. I was diagnosed in 1991. How about that? We do have a follow-up comment from Andre. I live in the UK. I have lupus. Is this a service you provide? And he also follows up with what an eye-opener.
Mm-hmm. All right. So lupus is an autoimmune disease. And what we know from the research published by Dr. Alessio Fasano. He was a researcher. He's a medical doctor and researcher. Initially, he was at the University of Maryland, where he discovered something called zonulin. Zonulin is a chemical made by the intestinal lining when it becomes irritated or inflamed, and it breaks down the tight junctions and it creates a leaky gut. Fasano eventually went up to Harvard. He now teaches pediatrics at Harvard Medical School and runs a pediatric gastroenterology department at Massachusetts General. So this is Dr. Fasano is a heavy-hitting guy. He's the real deal. What he has demonstrated is that in order to have an autoimmune disease, you have to have three things. You have to have a genetic predisposition. You can't turn a gene on that isn't there. But what happens is we find most people have genes for all of this stuff, everything from MS to Lou Gehrig's to lupus to, scleroderma, all of these things. Most of us have these genes. You live without them being turned on. You have to have the gene. You have to have a leaky gut in order to get an undigested protein, which looks like a piece of you, into your blood to develop an antibody to it. And then you have to have a trigger that excites the immune system into doing it. So in the case of lupus, let's say, or Hashimoto's or something like that, the very first thing you do is if you repair the intestinal lining, then you can eliminate undigested protein fragments from getting into the blood. The immune system will calm down. And what you see is you see autoimmune disease go into remission. And to our friend in the UK, but I practiced in London for a long time. I had a clinic in Harley Street, and if you live in the UK, you know exactly where that is. My son and daughter-in-law live in the UK, and I was just over there last week. I would encourage you, if you live there, find a functional medicine doctor where you are. If you were in the US, it'd be real easy, but if you're in the UK, it becomes harder for me to run your labs. Find a functional medicine doctor there in the UK that can run your labs and can help you. And if they're practicing functional medicine, they'll understand this. And yes, you can be helped with your lupus. So I still have my UK license, by the way. I can't order the labs for you from where I am. So there you go.
Now, besides nutrition, what are those other lifestyle factors and changes?
The other ones, I got off of nutrition. Other lifestyle factors, sleep. Sleep is way more important than anybody. You know, we even have this tendency to treat sleep like, oh, I only need 3 hours. That's not good. It's not a badge to wear on your chest. You know, I can live on 4 hours of sleep. That's not good. Sleep is important. Exercising properly. I know my generation, we got this idea that exercise means like 3 hours a day on the treadmill. That's not what you have. Exercising for your brain is very simple, and it doesn't take a long time. You've got to make sure that you're detoxifying properly. And if you have heavy metals or toxins built up, you got to get them out. All right. So we got sleep, exercise, detoxification, what we call mindfulness or stress reduction. When you're stressed, you create a cascade of hormones that are very, very damaging to your brain. Do you need supplements? You might. You know, some people are very supplement averse. Some people are taking a bag full of stuff. You might need supplements, but you need to be taking what you need and not just, you know, any old thing. The other thing you need is stimulation. In order for the brain to work properly, it has to be stimulated. And this is something that we noticed with COVID is when people would go into, you know, our lockdown thing and they weren't getting a lot of social interaction. I saw a lot of my patients declining because they weren't stimulating their brain. So what do we got? We got diet, sleep, the exercise, stress reduction or mindfulness, getting the right supplements, detoxification. Annie, did I miss one?
Nutrition. That's the huge one.
Well, diet, nutrition. Okay.
Yeah.
I think I got them.
You got them.
All of those things are what we call lifestyle. All right. And you've got to optimize your lifestyle. There isn't a magic supplement or a magic drug that will come in and do this. There are some things that we can take. Let's say if you've got your mercury problem, like Mr. Robbins did, there's a very particular protocol that we follow that can bind to that mercury and pull it out of you. But if you keep eating dirty fish or you have fillings in your mouth that are gassing off, you got to fix those.
There you go.
All right.
So what are the first initial tools that you use to assess someone as to what's going on for you to be able to identify those root causes?
So the very first thing we do is something called a CNSVS, or that's short for a Central Nervous System Vital Signs test. It's a computerized test. We do it right here in our office, or if you don't live in Sarasota, we can send you a link and you can do it at home and they will send me the results and we can go over them together. In other words, we want to know how well does your brain work? So we can take about a 30-minute computer test and it will tell us how good is your memory? What's your reaction time? Can you organize things? Can you do executive functions? And all of these sorts of things takes about 30 minutes. So we look and see, how well does your brain work? Then if it's not working well, then we do the MRI to find out, where is it shrinking? Because if I can identify where it's shrinking, then I know the things that tend to attack different parts of the brain. So mold and heavy metals likes to attack a part of your temporal lobe, all right, where diabetes would attack the whole brain. So you might have mold get back into a certain part of your brain, but if you have diabetes everywhere. So you would see global shrinkage. Maybe you've had trauma. Maybe you were doing fine and you had a car wreck and you smacked your head. And so you might see shrinkage in a part of the frontal lobe, because this is the front, which is where you normally would hit the windshield, right in here. So we look at, how does your brain work? If it's not working well, we want to use the MRI to identify where is the shrinkage and how much is there. Once I know where you're shrinking, then I know which labs to run to go look for what we call the usual suspects. You know, if the shrinkage is in a certain place, it's probably one of these guys. So I run those labs. When we can identify that, let's back to our example, mercury. Let's say you've got a mercury toxicity that is causing your temporal lobe to shrink and you can't remember things anymore. Well, I have a protocol that is very good at binding to that mercury, running it through your liver, which is your detox factory, dumping it into your colon so that you can eliminate it. So everything that we find, we have a protocol for fixing that. Did that answer your question?
Yes, and we also run a very comprehensive blood lab.
Yes.
That you look for specific inflammatory markers. So
Right.
If someone thinks that they can go to their general practitioner and get blood labs run, and they will be able to see these inflammatory markers that you use, it's not.
No, these are very special labs. I actually have my own panel at LabCorp. So if you go into LabCorp, you will run my panel at LabCorp. This will be the most comprehensive blood lab that virtually anyone will ever run in their entire life. And we have specific markers that look at inflammation in the brain and things like that. And so we're running blood. In other words, this isn't, oh, I think you have this problem. We run labs and we identify what's going on. Then we do what it takes to fix it. Then you rerun the lab and you prove that it's fixed. So we document the improvement as we go along. This is what's great, because when people say, well, you can't do that, I say, yes, I can. And here's the proof. And we have proof all over the place.
Doctor, this is really exciting. I want to be able to summarize it for our audience. If you live in the United States, you're not in Florida, and you want to have this particular blood test done, do we call this 941-350-7722 and speak with a coach like Annie?
Right. You can either call the number 941-350-7722, or you can send an email to support@thecaralinstitute.com. And Carroll is with 2 R's and 2 L's.
And if you're outside the United States, you can still make the call and send the email, but you might have to go somewhere to get the test, and then you can analyze it for them.
Yeah, and if we need to, I have virtual patients all over the world. That's not a problem. If we need somebody where you are, then we have a network of people. I can find you somebody where you are. Help you find someone. Yep.
And also I'm sorry.
And if they're not completely up to speed on what we do, I can give them direction.
And in addition to the blood panel, you also mentioned an online test that we can take.
Yeah, there is the CNS vital signs, central nervous system vital signs. I can actually send you a link. You can go on and you can take the test online on your computer, and they will send me the results. Then we can get on a Zoom together and we can go over the results together and then decide what you need to do next. Yeah.
Oh, that is exciting. And we have a thank you from Andre, our new friend there in the UK. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andre.
Cheers, mate.
I'll tell you, I can hang out with you guys forever for the rest of this day. We have another show starting less than 10 minutes.
Okay.
Dr. Glenn, this has been fascinating. I know, Annie, I've been a little obstinate because I wanted to get this eczema under control because you feel like you're going to go out of your mind. But I realized the Dupixent is just a patch. So I have the patch on, and now I have to figure out what's causing these problems. So I'm going to be working with you guys to figure out what that is. And I hope other people out there are going to be doing the same thing. Let's put up the contact information again. Dr. Garland, who should reach out to you? And in addition to the phone number, you've got the email address. You've got two options, Dr. Glenn.
Right. So if you're noticing that your brain is slowing down, brain fog, you're having some trouble remembering words, things like that, don't wait. This stuff does not stop or get better on its own. Something is driving it, and we need to identify it. That's who needs to reach out. So just about anybody.
Anybody and everybody in addition to me. Okay, because I'm going to be reaching out. We also have another comment from Holly LaCamera. Thank you for a great show. A friend of yours. All right. Thank you for watching.
Hi, Holly.
Thank you, doctor, for being here. I hope you'll come back and see us again. And I look forward to working with you and getting this figured out.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you.
Thanks again. Bye-bye.
See you Monday.
Bye. Annie, I'm going to spotlight you. We have your email address. I don't know if you have any special offers or information for our audience today.
I think there's going to be an announcement coming out in a week. So there may be some specials that are coming out with the LifeWave stem cell activation patches. So I will post them. I can post them in the comments. That's what I'll do, because we just got an announcement that there's going to be a special announcement on Mondays, but we never know what it's going to be. But again, these are the stem cell patches, and I'm going to go ahead and show you that there is a little crystal matrix in here that basically activates, and you would put it on a specific acupuncture point that would stimulate your own body's stem cells. And this is what Tony talked about in the book. This is his secret sauce, the activation of your own stem cells. And what they do is our bodies have this divine design that the stem cells will go where the repair is most needed. And like Dr. Glenn said, even in your hippocampus, in your brain, they will go there to help repair your brain or your liver or your heart or wherever it is in your body that's inflamed and needs repair. The one thing I did want to mention, though, Dr. David Sinclair wrote a book. It's called Lifespan, Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to. And we talked about genetics in your DNA. Dr. Sinclair references, and he basically says that your DNA is only responsible for 20% of your destiny. If the 80% is what turns on those genes, and it's what we talked about. It was exercise and diet and your sleep. It's those lifestyle changes and what he calls epigenetic factors that influence your DNA. So that's a lot of what we do. A little plug here for the Carroll Institute. That's what we do there as coaches. We have a certified holistic nutritionist there that works with you for your nutrition to optimize your brain health. Because without your brain, you don't have longevity, or your body is going to outlast your brain. And that's really sad, because you could be living your last years pretty much as a vegetable. And you want to live those last years of your life vibrant and in optimal health. And that's what our mission is here at Loving Longevity, is just to pass as much of this information along to empower you to embrace your longevity.
Annie, I'm so glad that we met. I have to thank John Christian again for putting us together.
Thank you, John.
Yay, thank you, John. I think he's in Portugal now. But it's such important information that you're bringing and that your guests are bringing to help all of us. So I salute you and I thank you.
Thank you for providing this platform. You know, it doesn't get any better than this.
Well, thank you so much. You have a beautiful weekend, and I look forward to chatting with you soon.
All right. Take care.
Thank you. Bye. We have so many wonderful experts that come here. I'm just so grateful and honored. And for all of you who are watching us I see you over there on YouTube and LinkedIn and Facebook. Thank you so much for being here. While you're over on YouTube, could you just click that little subscribe button so you can be aware of all of our shows? We have 22 shows a week. We've got people joining us from all over the world. And our mission is to bring you true news, true information. It's not really about entertainment. It's about education and knowledge and empowerment. So thank you for being here. I'm just going to share my little banner here. If you can go over to our YouTube channel, I put it there. That's how you subscribe. If you would like to be a guest on our show, go to our website, usaglobaltv.com/book your session. Some of the shows like this one, you have to be invited by our co-host because obviously we have specific topics that are going to be covered. But many of the other shows, we're happy to welcome you. I have my own show that I do, which is Adversity to Awesome. Let me get rid of that comment so you can see it. And we had our first episode today. This is my new book that's coming out, which is in alignment with the show. But it's all about people who have overcome incredible adversity to be the awesome people they are today. So I thank you for joining us, and I hope that you book your session to be with us again soon. I'm going to head over to the other studio. Wherever you are watching, please stay there. Our next show is coming up. It's presenting Pet Psychic Amina. We always have a lot of fun and some great conversations there. We'll talk to you soon. Have a great weekend.